Knowing the time and the presence of a quorum, I call this meeting of the Acton Finance Committee to order. The first item, as always, is public participation, and I see our select board member of the public is coming to the microphone.
Good evening. For a number of reasons, I believe that the proposed DPW building design is in the taxpayers' best interest. The proposed building is a good value. It's sized to be adequate now for offices, shops, alternatives for some, not all, of the desk space. Rent and utilities would cost tens of thousands of dollars a year, while remote operations would make the department run less efficiently. Also, common spaces would need to be duplicated. The current design is based on the work of the feasibility study and study committee. It's what was presented to town meeting when we asked for design funding. The design funding was supported by supermajorities of the select board and finance committee. A significant redesign now would mean wasting that $1.2 million. That's a lot of money. Even a medium redesign would require more money. Town meeting must be given a chance to vote on what they asked for. By the way, the resultant design is actually about 10% smaller than was shown in that study. Construction inflation is running almost twice overall inflation. It'll cost taxpayers about $1 million more each year that we delay, plus cost to design a different building. So if we wait a couple more years, it's likely to cost us $2 million more. If we begin again in 2029, it could cost us $6 million or more. DPW equipment needs to be protected from the cold and precipitation for a number of reasons. First, efficiency. Daily time spent organizing the equipment in the too small garage, putting on plows outside, etc., takes time away from work. Equipment on trailers that aren't going to be garaged has to be unloaded and stored every evening and brought out every morning. Second, longevity. The DPW crews take excellent care of our equipment. We have some trucks that are about 30 years old. Crew members feel bad if they have to leave equipment outside. Since everything doesn't fit, equipment that we don't often use in the winter doesn't get a place inside. Town meeting recently allowed us to buy a new bucket truck and chipper. That equipment, worth over $100,000, is stored under an overhang, but exposed to the elements. This is analogous to leaving your lawnmower outside during the winter. Only lawnmowers cost a few $100s. Third, readiness. DPW are first responders. When we have a big winter storm, police and fire require the DPW to get around. We don't want to be in the position where we can't begin to salt the roads until we scrape ice and snow from about a dozen trucks that are too tall to reach without a stepladder. Never mind keeping the freezing rain out of the sanders. As an example, the DPW's excavator, which is not often used in the winter, is stored out in the cold. This winter, we did need it though, but the diesel fuel had gelled. It took the mechanics a full day to get it operational. Finally, DPWs and other communities all keep their equipment out of the elements. Some do keep them covered in unheated spaces and use block heaters. The block heaters cover the engines, but not the hydraulics. A separate unheated canopy may be cheaper to construct, but it would cost more in the long run. Our plan is to have a minimally heated garage, just big enough to house the equipment that we have and no more. The wash bay and tight tank are included in this design mostly to protect the environment. The water in nearby streams shows increased connectivity, likely due to increased salt content. The evidence is circumstantial, but the salt may have come from past DPW operations. Our salt stocks are well managed now. The wash bay is such that so that we don't add any environmental damage, a key concern of many town residents. We have similar washing arrangements for our fire trucks to remove fire residue. It's no Taj Mahal, but the proposed design is what it is to satisfy the needs and expectations of Acton residents. I believe it's an excellent value. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
So at this time, that is our our third item on the agenda. Do we want to have the DPW conversation now with the select board member here and swap our agenda items?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to go down this path. Greg, I saw you first, and then Christy, and then we will go down the table.
David, you indicated that the current design is 10% smaller than what?
Than what was shown in the design study. So, which is what town meeting voted to give us money to design. So at that point, the feasibility study showed, I think, 52,000 square feet, if I'm not mistaken.
At the time of town meeting, what was the estimate for the building? I believe we were told, Ed, $32 million or something was the ballpark idea before the design went ahead.
Yes, of course, there have been now, that goes to the construction inflation argument, right? So the construction inflation has gone up in the intervening years. And the building cost, I think now is $37 million, and it's $43 million project cost. So it's gone from 32 to 37 since the feasibility study was done in 2021.
So that's not apples to apples. It's 32 to 37, not 32 to 43?
That's correct, 32
Okay.
to 37.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I would like to say that I think that your argument about not going back now and reviewing and not going back and making a change now is a sunk cost fallacy. What was brought to town meeting was $1.2 million to move ahead with the study. What the select board chose to do was to direct specifically to only move ahead with a building. You guys couched your language, couched your task to the subcommittee to only focus on what the previous committee had decided, and the previous committee had decided a building. So technically, you are correct. They are doing what you directed them to do. But I would argue you are not doing what is in the best interest of the taxpayers. What should have happened was a true needs assessment and a feasibility of how to address those needs. You've stated that there's no facility in town that can handle these different components. That is an assertion. I'd love to have seen the study, the statement that declares it. My understanding is there is a car dealership in town that is about to become redundant and might be for sale. Now, it may not be able to have the lift to lift the largest of our trucks, but we already have a lift that can handle the largest of our trucks. Furthermore, it is you, sir, who have said repeatedly that you do not like the amount of square footage of unused commercial space in town. It is by far cheaper to convert existing space than to build it at the absolute most expensive prevailing wage of all the towns within X number of miles, which includes Boston and Cambridge for the town of Acton. So it is absolutely in the taxpayer's interest for us to have discretion and to plan the best way to do this. And going ahead and saying that the most expensive way of building is the most effective way of meeting the taxpayer's need is also fiscally irresponsible. To say that we have to move forward now because we don't want to make any changes at all because it's going to cost us 6% more if we do it next year, that's absolutely true if you make no changes at all. But wouldn't you rather build the right size building and meet the needs of the taxpayers rather than say, well, it's just going to cost you more if you do it later? I absolutely reject the concept that this building is the right size, and I reject it for a number of reasons. We have a DPW building. It's not pretty. It's ugly. It would be great to have something different, but money doesn't grow on trees. What do you need for the people in the DPW building? My read of the situation is you need an appropriate space for changing and mustering. I grant you that the current building does not meet that need. I also firmly believe that if you get the people out of that building and turn the rest of the building over to storage space and indoor storage space for your equipment, that you will meet the indoor need. Therefore, it would be wiser to look at an individual building that meets the personnel needs, rather than raising an entire building, scraping an entire site, and building a gigantic building at the most expensive method possible, with the most expensive short-term source of electricity. I will also grant you that over the life of the building, it is possible that your energy-saving initiatives may break even. There is some evidence that it doesn't. I'm going to let Corinne speak to that if she chooses to do so. So therefore, I think it is absolutely wrong for you to stand up and say that this is the most cost-effective way of meeting the needs of this town. You all also said that our trucks are 30 years old. Okay? My understanding is that most of these trucks should only have a useful lifespan of 14 to 16 years. When asked about this at an ALG meeting, the town manager said, we're not going to try and calculate the cost of another 2 or 3 years savings. When he said that, what I heard was, it's not a tangible book value. If you're not going to bother to calculate it, then we can assume it's zero. Furthermore, we have the Weston and Sampson memo that talks about specifically how some generic 30 piece of equipment building, 30 piece of equipment fleet would save approximately $4 million by being indoors. Are you really trying to say to me that you think it is worth 2 years, merely 2 years of the cost of a 30-year bond to protect that? What dollar value are you attempting to put on the collaboration that you have just spoken of in the comments that you just had now? How expensive is Zoom? What's the likelihood of being able to have everyone on an open meeting all the time? There is no reason to build out anymore in this day and age. Furthermore, there's just the very real case of the year after an operating override, we cannot afford this, and you should not be asking for something that we cannot afford. You have a sunk cost fallacy. You've not proven your numbers for the value of the building. I don't understand. I do not understand why you are bringing this to town meeting. Absolutely.
So the study committee, which included 2 people from the finance committee, recommended that we do this. That study committee set aside replacing any buildings or other structures at the transfer station, but did recommend this building. And recommend this building based on the feasibility study, which was done before that. This building is not oversized. This building just meets the size needs we have now. It doesn't house anything else, that kind of thing. The building that we have is not even adequate to house the trucks and other equipment that we have. In my remarks, I said that, some things are outside that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And one side of that building, the concrete block, is literally being held together with epoxy. That building does need to be raised. That's just a fact. And I understand that we're a municipality and have to pay prevailing wage, but that's the way it is. There isn't another place in town. There's no other building that is big enough to house the equipment that we have. Is there a place that we might get it serviced? Maybe. But there isn't a place to house it. And I didn't say that it's the lowest cost thing, but I believe it's the best value and in the taxpayers' best interest. And this is what was presented to the taxpayers when they asked us, when we asked them to give us design money, and they voted to do that. And it was recommended by a supermajority of this committee, supermajority of the select board.
You said there were 2 members of the finance committee that were part of this. I believe Mr. Borden was the representative to the first feasibility, the first of the committees, and Mr. Nolde was the representative to the second committee. The second committee had precisely 1 meeting, I believe it was March 31st, and then the next meeting was in September. By the way, I still don't see those meeting minutes, posted on the website, nor do I see a record of that meeting having taken place, though that meeting is the day that you guys chose your construction manager. So that's an oversight on the website that I strongly recommend you fix. So to say they had 2 members of the Finance Committee is not entirely accurate. One, Mr. Burden did say that something had to be done. I do not believe, and I will let him speak for himself, I do not believe he ever signed off on a 43 or 37 or $47 million building. And Mr. Nolde, unfortunately, he's no longer with the committee. I grant you, he probably would have voted for your project. Unfortunately for you, he is no longer with this committee, and this committee is still unanimously, unless something has changed, unanimously against this proposal. So be careful about saying 2. Furthermore, the proposal that was granted at town meeting was $30 million for a feasibility study for the best possible solution. It was not a plan to specifically build a all-in-wonder building. So I disagree with your statement that this is what the taxpayers were presented with, and this is what the taxpayers are getting.
So before we had our Friday night meeting a couple weeks ago with the Board of Selectmen, Tom Began put some documents into a folder for all of us, and I went clicking around, and this one is a life cycle cost analysis of the different energy options here. The 3 are, the base is natural gas, and then there's air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps, which is part of the design. The ROI, just like skipping to the end, for air source, the ROI is negative 83%. And this is, I'm assuming that they don't have an ROI for the natural gas, so I'm assuming that the ROI is compared to the natural gas. For ground source heat pumps, the ROI is negative 52%, and it might be as high as negative 7% if all of the incentives are paid out, which is not a sure thing. So that's like the life cycle, but the upfront costs for the ground source, for the geothermal stuff is about $2.3, $2.4 million higher upfront. Like that's money that could just be taken out. And also, like I said, it's a cheaper heat source, a cheaper energy source. So I still don't understand why let's get this like green, this geothermal green energy at all costs. I think if we're looking for ways to bring the cost in to something that might be palatable to town meeting, I think that's millions of dollars that I think we need to look at.
So that life cycle analysis that was presented to the last building committee probably estimated too many geothermal wells. Actually, it's a wash, right? It'll cost the same either way. The numbers will be so close that it'll be hard to differentiate. I don't claim an ROI for this building based on that, but we had an ROI for other buildings, but this one, the costs are about equivalent. But 2 other things. First of all, the town meeting has adopted the stretch energy code, which doesn't allow us to put it in a natural gas building anymore without showing that it can't be done another way, right? So there are certain applications of burning natural gas, manufacturing processes and the like, where electric heating wouldn't work right. And so if those can be shown, then we can allow the use of natural gas. That's what town meetings adopted.
Okay, so thank you. How many wells are in the current plan? I know
40, I think.
There's 4, so that's in this analysis.
Yeah, it needs 30.
Oh, okay, so it should be down to 30, okay. So that was about $500,000.
That's an estimate.
Okay, so instead of $2.5 million, it's a $2 million difference. But as far as the town meeting adopting the stretch law, there's waivers, and the waivers include financial reasons too, if it's not financially feasible. That's something, again, I think town meeting should be allowed to decide. If they want to pay an extra $2 million up front plus additional cost over the life of the building, if they want to pay more for that.
So you would need to demonstrate that it's not feasible to do at the same cost. The numbers you just saw, the difference was 7%, assuming that there were
Best case scenario.
33% more wells than are probably needed. So that's why I say it's probably, the cost is a wash. That's not a financial incentive. And in this day and age, in 2025, you wouldn't build a new fossil fuel building. Why would you do that, right? Where the planet is in crisis. You know, this year they expected, because of La Nina, that we wouldn't hit a global temperature record last month. Guess what? We hit a global temperature record last month for recorded history. So, you know, in this day and age, we wouldn't put in something that burns fossil fuels.
So is it not also better for the environment not to redo all of this and just find some of the other space in town?
There is not another space in town which will house our equipment.
There are vastly cheaper ways of doing this. You can put up, every year the tennis camp puts up a bubble over their tennis courts to keep them minimally heated. That is an operational cost that's clearly cheaper than a long-term build. The building that you're in now is not going to fall down on you. And if you think it is, then it is significantly cheaper to brace it than to raise it. This is not the time to spend this kind of money. Also, on the concept of, I'll come to you in just a second, on the concept of making sure that we have what the workers need. Again, I stipulated at the beginning, I'm all for us putting in an appropriate building for personnel to solve what I clearly see as a need. But are you going to try and tell me that this new building is going to generate over $100,000 a year per person, per employee in efficiencies? More than their salary? That's ridiculous. I reject it outright. Mr. Jarbo.
I was planning to raise this at bullet point 3, but I guess we're doing this now?
That's what I asked earlier.
Okay. So at our joint session, marriage counseling, near the end, I shared a spreadsheet with all of us and with the select board. And I said at the time that I had just put the numbers together that afternoon. Since sharing it, I've discovered that there were errors that I need to correct. So let me correct those because I should acknowledge when I make mistakes, but also because it gets to the key question that we're wrestling with right now, which is how big a DPW building do we need? Is equivalent, is comparable? What are other communities doing? And it turns out the one number that I had that needs to get corrected the most is the square footage for the DPW buildings, plural, in Arlington. The number that I had used in my spreadsheet was 43,000 square feet. It was for the quote new DPW building. And the new DPW building in Arlington is 43,000 square feet. I've been there, I photographed it, I got a tour. But there were also 4 other buildings in the project that were renovated at the same time. One of them was for municipal IT services, so not comparable to what we're talking about. But the other 3 were for DPW equipment storage. So one of the things in the spreadsheet that I shared with you was, I think this is a 43,000 square foot new DPW building. It turns out it's a 75,050 square foot building in Arlington. So that's one data point that threw off a lot of calculations. The second calculation that I was advised to go back and double check my assumptions was on total road miles. And it's public data, and those numbers that I got were accurate. But that includes in Acton, not only the miles that we have to plow, the town has to plow, but about half a dozen miles we don't have to plow because they're in gated communities. And in the state highway that we don't have to plow, the state does that. But those are minuscule for us. For some other communities, particularly on the Cape, unaccepted roads is a huge percentage of the total in their town. And as a consequence, some of the numbers, when you start looking at comparables, get thrown way off if you don't use the accepted road miles number, which is also publicly available. So, mea culpa. I used numbers on the fly, and I had one error in data that I had to go verify, and I was using a road mile calculation that isn't really comparable. Now, when you plug that data in, I know, we're spreadsheet jockeys, right? I'll share you the spreadsheet. You can look at it. I'm going to share you a spreadsheet with 3 different tabs. The second tab basically says, look, there's a couple anomalies in here. Any good business analyst would say you take your really high outliers and your really low outliers and you throw them out. And so I took any community whose population was more than 20% larger than Acton's, and any community that was 20% smaller than Acton's, and I threw them out, and I came in with, the building we are proposing in Acton is 10% too large. And then I got conservative, and I know that's going to sound like an oxymoron. It's like jumbo shrimp. And I said, okay, let's just look at the communities that are within 10% of our population, up or down, and see how many road miles, accepted road miles they have, what they're paying for their, buildings. I did not look at because that's a number that will change over time. Okay. But guess what? Square foot does not change over time. So that's, again, the metric that I used. And using the more conservative list of comparables, it turns out that we're about 13.4% too large. So without arguing over how we're going to heat the building or whether it should have this thing or that thing, all which is valid debate, I'm just looking at square footage, and I think we are somewhere between 10 to 13% too large, depending on which list of comparables you want to look at. And if I were at town meeting, I would put that list up in front of the community and let them look at it, analyze it, and figure out why are we building something that is way beyond and pick the number, 7 or 14 comparable communities that we want to look at. Now, that's spreadsheet jockey talk. That's data. That's finance committee stuff. Let me now switch hats and talk politics. And it's straight politics. I wish I could come up with some other way to couch this, but it's politics. At our joint meeting, when I was initially saying, I think we need to cut this by 20%, the chair of the select board, and I don't know that she was being serious, but whether it was tongue-in-cheek or not, said, well, then I hear 10%. And I thought, oh, horse trading. Guess what? That's done in politics all the time. And what I'm saying is now that I've gone back and fixed the numbers, you know what? Somewhere between 10 and 14% is actually a prudent number. So what I would urge you to consider tonight, and I'm sorry I couldn't share all this with you ahead of time, I'm worried about violating the spirit of the open meeting law, is this. There are 3 issues. One was how fast we were going to build this thing. We resolved that. We got 2.5 million knocked off the price by going faster than 2 years and phasing it in. Chalk it up. I think we can also come to a reasonable number on what the appropriate scope of this building should be. And the only thing I don't think there is room to wiggle on, at least I don't see it, I can't imagine it, but maybe somebody else here can see it, is timing. I still think this is the wrong year to go in for a new DPW building. Why? Well, initially, because we'd had a really close override last year. That's what we were all talking about last fall. Today, we went to the school committee budget day on Saturday. In addition to wrestling with all the problems that they've got to deal with to come in with their budget estimate, they also are dealing with $1.7 million in uncertainty over federal cuts from the Department of Education, which may be abolished. And how do you plan for that? And so, no, we weren't talking about that last fall. We certainly can talk about it today. But I think that is yet another reason why now is not the time. Even if we can compromise on the scope, even if we've already accepted the fact that we can do this faster and save some money, I think what we really can't deal with is this is the most uncertain time in the world to ask people to say, hey, trust us. This is the minimum we need to get by. This is just a lousy time.
I want to play devil's advocate against that last comment. Selectman Martin's going to love this. What do you think about the fact that they're already not anticipating any cost in FY26 because the bonds won't come in until FY27? Does that change your point of view at all, or do you still think that now is not the time to present it in front of the town meeting?
I only have one financial advisor who, if I talked to recently, couldn't predict the bond market. Otherwise, I'd be moving money out of equities and into bonds. So the answer is nobody knows. Even the Fed can't figure out whether they're going to do another cut or two this year or not, because we'll just take tariffs. Okay, what will a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel do to the cost of our building? Is it going to happen? Or will it mysteriously disappear when the 30 days discussion with Canada lapses? Who knows? This is just a really rough time to say, let's go forward. Now, a year ago, I shared the story with who were members of the board then on what the Marines do when they're dealing with uncertainty. They have what they call the 70% solution. If you are 70% sure of the information you have, instead of waiting until you have 100% of the information, 70% you got enough.
Okay,
We don't have 70%.
Sounds like you're unmoved by my argument, by that.
I'm not buying it this year.
So I've been concerned as I see the various tariffs and the discussion about material costs rising. Is there any plan on at what point the estimates would potentially be revised? It seems like what we have might be what goes into play in May, or what's reasonable for May, or it might be a completely different number. Is there any discussion about when those recalculations might happen?
So if we decided not to do it this year, right, then we would have to have additional design money to make whatever changes town meeting thought we should make, right? And then that would involve a recost estimate, right? So, whatever we thought we needed to change would have to be recosted. So it's the same as when we do the value engineering, right? So if it's a value engineering item or something that we can change right away, then that gets recosted right away. If it's a medium level building redesign, then we'd probably have to ask town meeting for more money to redesign the building or modify the existing design, and then that would be recosted.
I'm not asking about a redesign. I'm just wondering, at what point do we lock in cost of materials, et cetera?
I could double check with the town manager, but very soon after town meeting, we would go out to bid and sign a contract.
Okay, so with tariffs potentially in place, would there be soon before town meeting potentially like, once we see how things are going, if we're looking at 20% of steel or whatever, is there a plan to do a recalculation, new
So,
estimate?
There certainly is not a plan right at the moment, since the tariffs were just put in place, today or yesterday. But we would have to figure out what we thought it meant after just a little while. We have a few months before we'd put the things in place, and how much a 25% tariff on foreign steel causes domestic prices to go up. Does it less than that, more than that? I mean, I don't know that anybody really knows. So, I mean, I could try to figure out. We do have two levels of contingency in the project. I mean, it's probably worth asking the question as to whether those levels of contingency could cover, given that, I'll say steel is, I'll just say 10% of the materials cost. If that goes up by 25%, what would that do to the overall cost of the building? So, but it's a very reasonable question, and I think we should look into it before town meeting. Thank you.
I just have a slightly different perspective on this. The little joint session we had, we were trying to understand where both sides are coming from. The way I view that is that there is a point where I would believe that every select board member and even the town manager would say the cost of this project would exceed their ability to, their willingness to just approve it as a project. Now, it could be 3 or 4 times, 10 times the cost. Everybody would have a different number. And for every member of the finance committee, I'm sure we all have different numbers in our head where we would say we would accept this or we would reject it. The issue that I have with this process is that there is a number where this project is too expensive, regardless of the design, to go forward with. And I would imagine that every taxpayer has got a different idea of what the number should be and what the tax impact on their bill they would be willing to accept. Now, at a very high level of this project, I don't see the issue as road miles or size of building. I see the primary issue of the project is the lack of looking at staffing needs separately and building needs separately. It doesn't mean when you get to the end of the analysis that they don't come back together again. But there has been, it was referenced by Steve, I believe in the joint session, that there was a study done a decade ago, and Dean dismissed that as something to even look at. It seems like there's no movement to discuss or think about how this could look differently as a project. And the staffing needs I have been identified are important, need to be addressed. And there are so many ways to deal with staffing needs. And if those two things are separated and the building need without staff stands alone and is supported by everything that everybody's presented, and everybody can justify the building as a standalone without staff there, then I think it is an easier thing for the voters, the taxpayers to digest. I think the commingling of the projects, the items, makes it more expensive, makes it harder to build in a faster timeline. And I don't feel like I feel like the lack of looking at this as two different items is a problem in the way this is being presented to the town. I guess that's all I have to say.
Thank you for that. I just want to understand, when you say staff, do you mean like office-type staff or all staff?
I'm not going to claim to be an expert on what everybody in the DPW does. When we walk through the building, I know for a fact that there are people that are there has been staff at the DPW that have been in this building historically. I don't know how many, I don't know who they are, I don't know how many are in that building. But I feel like the staff, the staff, like being resident in the building all the time is not necessary. I think that there should be workspace for needed work on the machinery, but I don't think they need to have cubicles in a building that's a garage. I feel like there's other ways of dealing with the staff.
I appreciate that comment. I just want to say that we don't have very much desk staff, right? There are somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 people total that sit on a desk ever, right? And of those people, some of them have specialty jobs that are associated with the crews. So, for example, the operations chief, the tree warden, the mechanics. They really have to be in the same building as the crews. And the lockers have to be in the same building as the crews because they go on and off jobs and they need to come back and change back into, shower and get changed back into civilian clothes. So let's call that roughly half of those 15, so 7, 8 people. The rest of them could potentially be moved to another place. But again, we're only talking about 7 or 8 people. We're talking maybe 1,000 square feet of this building devoted to their offices, and not including common spaces like, meeting rooms and stuff. So there are 3 people who are currently in the engineering staff, including the town engineer. They used to be elsewhere. And I think those are the people you're talking about. Everybody else, I think, was not elsewhere in kind of my lifetime here. The DPW director could be elsewhere. The engineering staff could be elsewhere. I said in my remarks that we could, for some of the staff, let's say roughly half of the desk staff, we could find office space in town and rent for them. But it means that the town engineer can't easily talk to the crews and go over plans with them and say, this sidewalk needs to be done differently. And so it reduces efficiency there. It means the DPW director, when he wants to talk to the crews or wants to talk to the town engineer, has to do that either by phone call or visiting another site. And so there's a lot of inefficiency there for gaining back about 1,000 square feet. I completely appreciate your comments. And the only thing I wanted to emphasize is that we're not dealing with a lot of people where, I used to work at IBM and we had what you were talking about in some previous meetings where it was kind of open office. You come in and select a cubicle for the day, you bring your coffee cup with you, everything is on your computer, you hook it up to the monitors, they're there, when you're done, you leave. And if you're traveling, you don't use a desk. We have such few people in that mode that there's very few people who could share in that way.
Why do the lockers have to be in the building that has the garage?
It's just
Why
that
can't they be just 2 feet away in a different building?
Well, if we had another place for a building, but then they come back having been on a work site with things
So if you have to walk from here to there.
Oh, if we
If
could,
this was the garage and that hallway over there was a different building with showers and locker rooms,
So that
why
could-
can't it be in a different building?
that could be, no, that would be fine.
But that's my point.
In the original feasibility study, that, it was a phased plan, and so I know we're not doing the phased plan, but there were several alternatives offered and shown at town meeting. All had the total space, but some were in multiple buildings, right? So we had a garage building and an office building, and at this building and at that building. And that could be, and that was done at that time to phase the construction. Then we decided that we could phase the construction with the front half and the back half of the building, and then at your urging, we
Right. but
decided
when you-
not to phase the
When you had
community.
all these meetings previously, it was based on different financial go-forward assumptions than we were faced with today. So if I didn't have any belief that I was going to have financial constraint, I would definitely try to do something that was more cohesive and made more sense and didn't really pay attention to price.
So it is certainly possible, and Jason alluded to this too, and that to make a canopy-covered garage and an office building. And the lockers would be in the office building. And you said like we
Right,
could.
so just to summarize, my core point is that I feel like that from a taxpayer perspective, in understanding how this works, that there should be a very clear understanding as the need for the housing of the machinery as a standalone and the need of the staff as a standalone. That's in my own personal opinion, that they should stand by themselves, be supported so that people understand why they are spending money on this.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I only have one point I want to make. I share the opinion with the committee members that this is not the right size for the building. And I think the data that the Western and Sampson provided and the town manager provided also has some evidence to support this. According to the slides that Western and Sampson provided in 2023, comparing the size of the public work facility with similar communities. There are 24 communities on this slide, and there are 11 or 12 communities that have a smaller size public work facility than Acton. We're right in the middle on the average, which is supported by the email sent by the town manager this afternoon, suggesting that the square footage of the proposed DPW building is 5% smaller than the average, which also means that we are more or less on the average as supported by the number that you provided. According to Greg's number, we are higher than the average. So let's just based on the data that provided by the town manager and Western and Sampson. In today's uncertain situation, would the override that was passed by a very small margin last year, I think it's a clear signal from the taxpayers that we cannot afford this. With this fiscal stress environment, I think we should build something that is substantially lower than average. That is something that meet the absolute basic need, not just something that's just on the average or around the average. So I think that's a room to cut the size of the building.
Keep it short, Greg.
Yeah. When you get the spreadsheet, you'll see there's 3 tabs. The first tab has 20 comparables, which is similar to the data that you see there. Tab number 2, which is the 10% cut, has 13 comparables, and sheet number 3 has 7 comparables. So if you want to look at all 20, that is a fair point of view. I discounted it partly because it includes a city like Medford in the comparables, which doesn't seem comparable to me,
Okay. So
et
Greg,
cetera.
you're going to have to send that message, that document out anyway, because it was discussed in this meeting. It needs to be attached to the minutes as an exhibit anyway. So send it to, and if you wish to put a simple paragraph resuming what you have said in this meeting, you're allowed to do so. That would not qualify as deliberation because you're merely stating what you have said in the meeting, and that way we'll have it. Roland?
So I keep going back to, well, one is I think the town engineer, assistant engineer, and that should be not in that building to save square footage. the secretary and things like that. I don't see that as a need, maybe more of a want. The other one that I keep going back to our listening sessions, and what is a theme that we've been hearing over and over and over again, is the taxes are getting out of control. And if we decide this year, well, we'll have some rolling up, but we're going to spend another, it's going to add up the taxes again. I feel it's going to go to the ballot box and it will go down in flames. Because people are sick of paying high exorbitant taxes. And I'm starting to think, well, heck, my son gets out of high school in 4 years, I may have to consider moving if the taxes keep going the way they are. Because my taxes at that point will be high. For a split level, it'll be over 15, 20 grand a year at that point, the way we're going. So I think we really need to pay attention to how we're spending our money. We keep getting more and more newer electric vehicles. Well, that comes with a cost. Then holding on to the ones that we have for town hall staff. And again, I go back to that point of being, how many vehicles do we need for town hall? They say, well, I said, why can't the employees drive their own vehicles? Oh, we can't do that. Corporate America does it every single day. They pay mileage, which helps cover insurance and everything else and wear and tear on the vehicle. That's, I think, is a solution. We get rid of most of the town vehicles that we don't need for the town hall, which has cost savings beyond registration, insurance, maintenance, et cetera. So I really feel as a committee that, and the select board should take this as well, is how much is it going to add on to the average tax bill in this town, and what's going to happen to our citizens that are struggling now? We're most likely not going to be getting as much federal funding or state money the way we're going. So all these add up, and then things go out of control, and then we have to come back for an operating override again, which if we come for another operating override in the next 5 years, I am not supporting it.
To briefly answer your question, Roland, it's about $500 in fiscal year 2027 is the delta on the ALG spreadsheet. I'll be happy to throw this up on the screen when we get to the ALG portion of this,
For,
just for the DPW building.
and that's how long, 30 years?
30 years. 30 years. So it's $2.5 million a year for 30 years. Put another way, if there are 15 employees in that building, we're looking to get an increase in efficiency of $166,000 per employee per year for 30 years. If you don't think we're going to get that level of efficiency out of the employees, then this building does not make sense. Mr. Lenz.
Hi, thank you. Have there been discussions about what, actually I have two things. Have there been discussions about what the absolute bare bones minimum viable product for this project is? Like, do we need the truck washes? Do we need this space or that space? Has that been happening? And I know I'm coming into this late because I'm new and I've been out of town for a while, but has that been happening at all? And this is a question for everyone.
No, so from the time that the $1.2 million was approved of at town meeting to go to conduct a feasibility of what we need, they had one meeting on March 1st, and then they did not meet again until September when they presented a $40 million plan that ballooned up to $47 million shortly thereafter, before it's now been clawed back to a $43 million
Because the
plan.
observation when you're putting together a development life cycle for something, regardless of whether it's software or a building, requirements gathering sessions. You want to do an analysis of what are our must-haves, should-haves, could-haves, and want-to-haves. And so that's that one piece. Actually, three things. The second one is, you mentioned that like the building has got epoxy holding some of the cinder blocks. Has there been a building inspection of this recently? And has the building inspector said that totally this building needs to be raised? Or it needs to be, a retaining wall? Or this is not safe for use? Has that happened at all? Does anybody know? Because that would actually be a big driver of it too. Not just we need better facilities, but yeah.
Fortunately, you don't need to have the building inspector come unless you change something.
Okay.
So this building would, there's no doubt it would not pass any inspection for current building. It is totally non-compliant with any current standard. And this is essentially the minimum required building. The size of the garage does not quite hold every piece of equipment we have. So it's right at the minimum. We need the wash bay, as I mentioned, for environmental reasons. We could delete that. I bet you if we went to town meeting that they would want it back. We need the 3 mechanics bays. We have 3 mechanics bays. We didn't put in 5 mechanics bays. We need the shops where we create signs and that kind of thing. And we have the shop space. And for the office space, there's 1 empty chair in the designed office space. There's not room for expansion. So in this whole building, there's a little bit, not enough room for vehicles and 1 extra seat for someone to sit.
And then, thank you for that, and this is helpful. And then the last thing is an observation. You know, a lot of us use social media, or we look at social media. I have been receiving in my news feed on Facebook over the last couple weeks, sponsored posts by some random person that has, it's been hitting like the Acton algorithm for complaining about, well, we're going to be spending all of this money on the DPW for a building we don't need, and yet we don't have any budget for sidewalks. And that, I don't know if anybody else has seen that on any, have you seen that? And so going back to your points before, and this is just an observation, a little bit of opinion, I feel pretty strongly that, like, unless there are some changes made, when we take this to town meeting, it is not going to pass, especially if everyone that responds to those sponsored posts is like, this is awful, what the hell, why do we need this for? I would never vote for that. So, observation, a little bit of opinion there. So, you know, there has to be a path forward, but what's the right?
I would like to say that I think both entities at this point have said, well, we'll just let the voters decide. And I think that's a bit of a fatalistic approach, but we are also rapidly running out of time for this year. As a committee, we raised our hand in August saying we didn't like this. The first mention of compromise out of the DPW building in the select board was in January. So there was lost time there. I would also say on the concept of if we just throw up our hands and say, let's let the voters decide, I think it's very important, no matter what the vote is afterwards, to come back and say, what do you think the voters said? What did you hear at the ballot box or at town meeting? Because it's possible for someone to say, well, I heard we just didn't do a good enough job communicating. I heard we just didn't get our message out. And this building is absolutely mandatory. He just said again, he can't think of anything that he could possibly imagine cutting. So that becomes an impasse where the only way around it is either to get beat at the ballot box multiple times in a row or to force this thing through and leave a bad taste in everyone's mouth about, we have just spent $45 million on a building that I cannot justify when we have over $90 million in identified want in the town manager's capital improvement plan. So why are we going to spend this amount of money this close to an override when you can't even convince this committee that this building is needed? And at the risk of me putting words in people's mouths, at the end here, we're going to go around the table and I'm going to ask everyone what their opinion is on this, because Scott and I have to walk into ALG tomorrow morning at 7:30 in this exact same room and deliver the opinion of the committee. And that we might be at that point unless there are other comments that are wished to be made at this time. Has everyone had a chance to speak their piece on this topic? Okay. I'm going to start with you, Alex, because you were the last to speak. We'll work this way around the table. Have you been convinced by anything that you read by the town manager today or from what Selectman Martin presented to us tonight? Do you feel that we should go forward with a $37 to $43 million project at this time?
Oh, so many caveats with this. I do not feel that we should move forward with spending that much on this project. I do feel that just by going over there and seeing the state of the state over there as an end user, that there needs to be significant improvement of the facilities and the site. However, I do recall having a conversation with someone when before I was on the committee, and they told me the dollar amount, and I was just getting involved, just kind of feeling holy cow, that's a lot of money. Well, I'm not going to swear. My decorum, thank you very much. But yeah, I can't support it with that kind of money.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sagseth?
My short answer is, I agree with Alex. I can't support this amount of money at this time. And the slightly longer answer is that I don't like having this conversation as a standalone thing. There are operating budgets for the school and the town, and both entities have capital needs and can't have everything. And then people have to start talking about trade-offs. And that's a longer-term thing, and I don't think any of that's been present in any of these discussions. But again, short answer is no.
Something Scott said resonated with me, this idea that we all have an idea of how much we think we would stomach spending on this. And I think back to the fire chief asking for 8 FTEs, and town manager said, you get 2. So what if, y'all came to us and said, we want $45 million, and we said, okay, you get 10. What can you do with 10? Can you meet the immediate needs, minimum viable product, whatever terminology you want to use? What needs can you meet with that? But because that's how budgets are typically done, right? You're told what the number is, and then you see what you can do with that number. And I don't know what the magic number is for me, but other aspects of our town government are looking at what they have, and they're trying to, be thoughtful and creative with what they have. And this project, maybe because it's a debt exclusion, doesn't feel like it's subject to the same consideration, but I might be more willing to vote for it if it seemed like that amount of thought was put into it, that this was truly the best we could do, and that there was truly a need, but I just haven't seen that level of, yeah, I think you'll know what I'm getting at. I don't think I would be able to vote for it for that reason.
I would not be in support of the project as it's currently presented, primarily due to my feeling that the staffing cost is increasing the price, and it could be drastically reduced by rethinking how staff is managed at this site.
Roland?
So I think you know where I stand, because I kind of just went over that.
But you got to state it out loud so that the message is loud and clear. Where do you stand?
Right now, I can't support it at that dollar value. You tell me it's going to be 25 million, that's a different story. In the 40s, no. And again, I think it's the wrong time to come back to the sinners. We just had 6.8 million, was it? Or 6.6 million override to the operating budget. And then we're going to say, well, we want to spend 40 plus million. And I just don't see how we can do that this year. I really don't. I mean, I'd love to see a smaller proposal come back. And as Scott said, move the personnel that don't need that facility to be in there, the town engineer, secretaries, the director, things like that, into office spaces in the town.
To me, the magic number will be a number that you can do without a tax override. Figure out how much money you can pay from your operating to service the debt, and issue a debt that you can service with your operating budget. And the reason I'm not supporting override is because I think last year, the taxpayers already sent a message that's very loud and clear, which is that they don't want another tax override. Also, given the time of uncertainty, the inflation is not going down as we expect, and there's also uncertainty with the federal funding. If we force this to a town hall meeting to override, even it pass or it doesn't, we may lose the trust of the taxpayers. And when it comes a time, maybe in the near future, hopefully not, but if there comes the time that we really need an override that gets the support from both the select board and the finance committee, even in that case, the taxpayers may vote no. So with this disagreement between the select board and the finance committee, with this uncertainty, with the sentiment of taxpayers not wanting another override to increase tax, I'm not comfortable supporting this.
Well, you heard a lot about what I think about this. You're trying to get ready for a meeting tomorrow morning of the ALG. I'm trying to get ready for a meeting tomorrow evening of the DPW Building Committee that I am this board's representative to. I would have loved to have been able to bring them a compromise. Wouldn't that be nice? I think that was at our listening session that we held at the senior center, there was at least one person who said, can't you find a difference between yes and no? And I thought that was worth a college try. I don't see that compromise materializing. And if that materialized, great, then we could make other compromises. But without one, then I gotta fall back to my basic first starting point, which is no, this is the wrong time. This is the wrong scope.
Sorry to interrupt. Were you hoping that a 14% decrease in overall size would be the compromise that was the breakthrough at this committee this evening?
Actually, there needed to be two compromises. One, if we got to 14%, that would be really big step forward, and we're not there. The second compromise is timing. I don't think it's this year. Understand our position that it could wait until 2029. The compromise would be somewhere 2028, 2027.
Okay.
But, you know, no need to go there. If a 13% is a non-starter,
Okay, thank you.
I can't afford this. We are not living within many people's means in this town, and we heard that a fair amount at our first listening session. I have a really hard time, like, I could 100% believe, and the studies looked at it. People who know more about this building than me looked at it and said, this is what we need. And my response is, I don't have the money for that. And there was no comeback around to, can we make it more palatable? I have a big concern that this is going to go forward. If it fails at the ballot box, where the heck are we? Have we just wasted, like, do we then need to go do a redesign? I understand the logic of wait and see if people will just afford it, but then we're still pushed into the inflation hitch that we're worried about. I'd rather have a project go forward that I am comfortable is affordable for our community members. I have too many friends who are retirees who have left the town because it just doesn't make sense to retire here. And I'm not talking about the people who have their kids in high school and then leave. I've lost dear friends to other places, and we're reaching the point where I'm starting to consider my retirement plan, like Roland was saying, elsewhere. It's just, I can't do this right now, and I'm afraid that I'm in the majority of this town, and we're not, this project is tone deaf. So that's my concern as a finance committee member with the goal of representing the taxpayers in the longer term, that I would love for something to be done to bring this more in line. I don't know what the affordable number is. It's closer to 30 than 40 as a, like, all-in number. And I mean, if you're building your house, you have to figure out where the compromises are or what can change. And I don't know if that's, we just don't do it right now, or we figure out some ways that things can be added later. But a way to bring, if this needs to happen right now, I would need to hear some creativity on bringing the cost down. It could be the same total cost long-term, or maybe some more stuff later is a little more expensive, but we have more money then because we've gotten further along. So I don't say no to the project. I don't say no to the ideas that are in it. For me, it's this cost at this time. So I'm not second-guessing any of the why is it in there. And that's what I hear when a lot of people come with ideas for why are we doing this or that. It's an attempt to justify in our minds why, is there something we can do to bring this down to a level that we feel like we can afford and recommend to other people as an affordable. So that's where I am. So no, I don't support it at this cost right now.
So I would love for us to be able to get to a position of yes. I would love for us to have, first of all, I would love for us to have started having the actual conversation about the compromise closer to August than in late January. At this time, I'm a no for both timing and for cost. And I would strongly urge that if this does fail at either the ballot or the town meeting, that you circulate to your other members that this is not just well, we'll try it again next year and screw it, it's going to cost them 6% more. We're not interested. I would like to end, however, with a thank you to you for coming and standing this entire time and coming into a committee that is uniformly against your position. I think standing up and saying what you said at the beginning took a lot of guts because you knew that you were going to be tilting at windmills against this committee. I do hope you heard everything that we said, but I do appreciate you coming and standing your ground against a committee that is now, again, unanimously against this project.
So thank you as well. I appreciate that all you guys giving me feedback today, and I appreciate that you guys all came to one joint session. It looks like we're going to have a second joint session, and I have to say that I think, I realize that we're very far apart, but I think it comes from the point, the emphasis that each of our boards has, right? You guys are obviously interested in how the town operates, and the town operates well, but your focus is on the finances. In the select board, we obviously want to spend the taxpayers' money well, but our focus is on making things operate. And in this particular project, that causes us to be here. Sometimes those different points of view were like this far apart, but in this case, we're very far apart. Anyway, I appreciate all of your involvement in all the extra meetings and everything.
On the topic of the second joint meeting, I heard from many of you that you could do any of the days. I took the Tuesday off the table because we have our own meetings those days. I did hear from some people that there was a preference for the Thursday. Unfortunately, earlier today, it wasn't today, it was no, it was today. Earlier today, I did hear from the chairman of the select board that they have a preference for Friday. Nobody said they couldn't make Friday.
Is that Friday this week?
No, next Friday, the 28th. Friday, 2 weeks from this coming Friday, because next week is school vacation week. I'm out of town. I'm assuming other people are out of town as well for school vacation week. So since nobody objected to the Friday, I did hear some preferences for the Thursday, but since nobody objected to the Friday, can we all nod our heads and get a quorum for Friday the 28th, and I will communicate that back to the select board chair? No. Very good. Thank you. We're gonna try it again on Friday the 28th. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Probably 7. Okay. Yep. We'll definitely send out an agenda. The select board usually meets at 7. We usually meet at 7:30. I'm more than happy to start at the earlier time. Yes. Okay. So that was the third item on the agenda. We purposely took it out of order. I'm sure that the thundering hordes of the public that joined us in this meeting do not object to us having made such an on-the-fly change to the agenda items. So that brings us to the second item on the agenda, which is a conversation about the ALG spreadsheet, which I am going to attempt to share at this time. Look at that. It works. Okay. Again, this is hot off the presses. This came in, I believe, right around 4 p.m. today, which means that I honestly have not had more than a cursory look at this between my regularly scheduled job and trying to get some food in my belly before I come over here for the evening meeting. As you probably know about the ALG spreadsheet, there is a changes tab that discusses anything that's gone on since our last meeting. Looks like there are 3 changes. Okay. Positive numbers here, F39. So positive numbers here are good for the taxpayer, negative numbers here are bad for the taxpayer. The reduction in the town capital plan by 37 grand, it's worth noting. Looks like the Minuteman assessment, am I reading this properly? The Minuteman assessment went down?
You are correct.
Okay, very good. So that's going in the right direction. And then it looks like the school, yes, the ABRSD assessment went up, and that, I want to point out that the reason the result of the assessment going up shows, and I want to hang a lantern on this because I'm going to beat up on it later, the total assessment, the operating assessment of the school district is up 3.12%. I believe at the previous document it was like 3.01 or even sub 3.
Yes, and the vote that they took on Saturday to do that was contingent. They understood that the $1.7 million in federal funds that are at risk could make them have to cut. So they thought they would start with not to exceed number, but if bad news comes in between now and when they have to go to press for the warrant, the number will come down. But so that is an increase from their previous vote, but the thing that I heard was it was a contingent understanding that a lot of their so-called revenue estimates are really iffy.
Thank you for that clarification. Yes.
This is totally factual, not my opinion on anything. So, so respectfully, Greg, I don't think this had anything to do with federal funds, right? The federal funds that go to the school district to a large extent are for, there are a number of different grants, but a lot of them are for the school lunch program. And if that was lost, we'd have to charge kids again for school lunches, but that's different. So this is the result of 2 things. One is, and this applies to the town too, but the town's numbers are not in here yet, that the Maya health insurance estimates are up by about 50% more than what we thought they were going to be. So we thought they were going to increase 10% year on year. They're going to increase almost 15% year on year. So the school district already has a pretty tough year, despite the fact that because they're limited by Boxborough, and they're making cuts that, in my view, are almost more painful than previous years. So what they would like to do here is there are a couple of areas where they believe that state funding is going to come through. And the way that this works in most years, is they just kind of ignore that because the legislature never passes anything until after their deadline. And then it goes into E&D and can possibly be used for some expenses, one-time expenses, whatever is appropriate the following year, but doesn't apply to this year. This year, with the increased health inspections, they're either going to have to make another pretty significant cut to do that, or what they were proposing here is to anticipate that the state aid that they expect is going to come in. So it's already in the governor's budget, the state aid, and there's 2 buckets of state aid that are going up. One is for special ed, one is for, the other is for the normal, I forget what they call it now, but it's the normal $30 per pupil state aid. In the governor's budget, it's $75. Sometimes the legislature goes above that, which they have for the past couple of years. And in this case, they almost never go below what the governor asks. In fact, I don't think anybody can remember what time they've gone below. So they're expecting to get 75. But it's not cast in concrete. The legislature has not voted or anything. So what the school district is proposing is to, if they don't have their budget can never go up. So after now that they've taken their first vote. And so they voted it up a little bit, and then they would make an in fiscal year modification if the state aid doesn't come through. So let's suppose that we get to August and the legislature says, no, we're not doing 75, we're doing 50 or whatever it is. They would pass change their budget down from that and reduce the assessments to each of the towns. Does that make sense?
That is what happened on Saturday. And then I asked the question, and what are your assumptions on federal? And that's where we discovered that, yes, we're not quite sure what the state's going to do. We think we've got a handle on it. But the feds, the superintendent said, we don't know. We're waiting for guidance.
Well, right, we really, so this doesn't take into account any federal stuff. That's a little bit of a risk, but a lot of that risk would result in charging kids for lunches. So there's other stuff too, and I'm not making any claims about that. So I just wanted to point out that that 1.7 million is not completely a risk to the taxpayer, but a lot of it will be risk to the parents.
Thank you. Okay, moving down, other line items that we spent a lot of time talking about on this spreadsheet. We are not planning on using any of the unused tax levy capacity at this time. We are looking to use slightly more free cash than last year. Free cash is what we spend time looking at on the reserves tab. It is our opinion as a committee that we want to keep reserves at about 3%, a 3% floor for true rainy day funds. It is important to note that this current model eats significantly into that floor. So if we forecast out even just one more year, we're below our floor. If you could forecast out a couple of years, we're down to 2/3 of 1%. So that's a question that I have for the committee is, are we comfortable using free cash and letting it go down to those levels? Then the other item that I want to bring to everyone's attention, I hung a lantern on it earlier, so you all know exactly where I'm going before I even say it. If the schools who are cutting again, and Selectman Martin just said that he feels that that is pretty severe cuts on the school side, they've managed to keep their operating to 3.1. The municipal side has as their operating side, and I'm fully aware of the fact that the municipal budget, the operating budget includes quite a number of smaller capital items that are rolled into it, that are more capital intensive than the school side. they're taking this opportunity to try and come with a 4.9% increase. So I think we need to talk about reserves. I think we need to talk about the municipal side. And then lastly, do just want to point out that even this that we're at right now is exceptionally close to balanced, but not balanced. At $130,000, that's not usually an insurmountable number, even this late in the year. But if you take that $130,000 and you play with the reserves number in any way, shape, or form, saying that you are not comfortable with reserves going down to 2/3 of 1% in a couple of years, or if you take a look at the municipal side and say, in a Prop 2.5 world where we've been recommending operating budgets go up by no more than 3%, perhaps this is not the year to go up 4.9%. And since he raised his hand, I'm going to go to Mr. Lenz. You got to put the microphone on.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not used to that habit yet. So I was out of town after the 2 workshops where we got the presentations from everyone. We're making the recommendations now, or have we started to make recommendations to the various municipal, cost centers?
We ratified our point of view in August of last year,
Okay.
and it said 3% maximum operating increase year over year.
Okay, so they've made their presentations, and this is what we have set our baseline. So we need to tell them that they need to come to us with a haircut, effectively, right? And I like the comment that you made earlier, about we want this for our budget for this year, but you know what, you're getting that. Deal with it.
We don't have that kind of power.
I
mind you.
understand, because I'm in the budgetary, at Olympus, I'm going through the budget cycle right now. And, I want to hire 26 people this year, and I want to have a budget of X, Y, and Z. But, the overlords of Olympus have said, you can hire 15, and this is what your budget's going to be. And deal with it. So I'm going to make it work.
We do not have the power to say, this is your budget, deal with it. All we can say is, our recommendation is that you
Right.
try and stay within 3%, lest you accelerate the need for another operating override in the near future.
And that's-
So the question then becomes, how vociferous would you like Scott and I to be tomorrow morning when we say, we recommend a 3% budget? We see the school side coming exceptionally close to it. We
Right.
see the school side firing more people. You are hiring, was it 6.7 FTEs?
Sure.
And increasing your budget. How, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of a Jason asshole should I be tomorrow morning?
Compared to baseline? No.
This is what happens when somebody I've known for more than a decade joins the committee.
So, well, now, there's a couple of things to think about here. So, one is, we recommend you get to 3%. And two, if we're not getting to that 3%, how are we going to build back the reserves when they're down to 0.66, right? And that actually also brings up a question that I had, and this is not an opinion, but it is a question based upon me learning a couple things. Something that struck me during I don't remember which night it was, but it was the nursing services for the town. Something that struck me that I wanted to ask the committee here is that I heard them say, or I can't remember who it was, that we are one of 2 towns in this entire state that offers these services. And to me, that came up with why are we doing that? And it's not an opinion. It's if there are 330 plus towns, why are we offering this service? And, it's a good chunk of change in the budget. And Or, is it providing, why are we doing it? Does anybody have an answer for that? Like,
Is this the service that's Medicare certified and seeks reimbursement? It's a home health agency.
yeah.
So it's potentially a source of revenue. And actually, it looks like we might be getting
But
some
when I
more
saw it,
background on
I thought it
that.
was like $100-something thousand worth of revenue for the year based upon 700 and change in cost, right?
So it's self-funding, right? So
Yeah.
largely self-funded. And the reason it still exists is because town voters wanted it that way. We actually tried to delete it about a decade ago, and
Okay.
town meeting vehemently voted against removing the nursing service.
Mm-hmm.
So we could try again at some future year, but the town meeting was very supportive of the nursing
Oh, I
service.
It
personally
is
like
also
it.
important to
My-
note, it is important to note that when the last attempt to cancel that service failed at town meeting, it was an enterprise fund. Now it is no longer an enterprise fund. Now it is part of the generalized budget and is at the town manager's discretion.
It's also important to know that at the time that that this was rejected from going away, it was promised that it would pay for itself. And there's been a significant reduction in claims, in the money they get back because of how Medicaid has changed, because of the private management of a bunch of the plans. They get, I think last time we talked about it, they get $700 per person as opposed to the $1,500 or something they would get under Medicaid in the previous. So the math, the underlying math has completely changed. And as Jason pointed out, you can't identify it in a way that you could previously.
And I'd also like to say, I think discussing putting the nursing service back on the chopping block is a valid thing for us to do at some time. I think it's way too late in the year to do it this year. If we'd like to make it a part of our point of view, we can discuss that in May. This year, unless something catastrophic happens, I don't think we need to go after the nursing service this year. I'm more than happy to have the conversation later on.
Oh, sure. This is more of a recon for me because, when my mom was over at Robbinsbrook before she went over to Life Care, she took advantage of the nursing services because it was a good benefit. But I was just curious as I'm learning more about, where our tax dollars are going, so.
Let's review that after we get through this town meeting. At this time, are you comfortable with us pushing back to a 3% operating budget?
I absolutely am. I mean, it's two things for me. One is our recommendation is 3%. How do we get there? And two, we cannot have our rainy day funds go down to less than 1%. How do we maintain a floor of 3%?
Are you comfortable with saying that the current town reserve estimate, we are currently in FY '25. So current expectation is we'll be at 3% at the end of next year. Are you comfortable hitting the floor this coming year, or are you saying that we should be a couple tenths of a percent above the floor this coming year to try and lower the trajectory, or are you open to the concept that maybe turnbacks, and we haven't had this conversation yet, but are you open to the concept that turnbacks might be greater than it was this previous year, because this previous year, everything got eaten up by health insurance, and therefore you think that we can punt this for another year?
Yeah, I'm conservative with regards to those sorts of things. I don't like punting. I like having the cash reserves.
Okay, so you're definitely on the conservative side on both points. Anybody else wish to weigh in on this? Do we want to go around the table again? Nice and brief, please, Mr.
So the model does not include the turnback, which is why the level goes down. And the level right now the model assumes that we're spending $1,250,000 a year in pre-cash in the out years. We usually turn back between $500,000 and $1 million. Maybe we should, first of all, change that out year thing to $750,000 a year to choose that midpoint. But we never add that number into the model until it's certified by the DOR, which is why it goes down in out years. So if you wanted to play with the model, you could either set that to 0, in which case you're assuming that it's neutral with regard to the turnback, or add a turnback in or whatever. I just wanted to point that out. That's why it goes down.
We used to have an assumption of turnback in the model.
Not that I recall. I won't say absolutely that we didn't, but not that I recall. The Finance Committee has always never wanted to assume until it was certified. So, but we could, one way to do that would be just assume 0 free cash use in the out years, which makes it neutral.
Christie?
When we switched over to not assuming that it was certified, the projections were taken out. When we started insisting that they spend only the previous certified amount and not make an assumption about what the free cash would be come spending time, they took out the projections.
Okay. Yes, Scott?
Do you have the dollar amount to get from 4.9 to 3%?
Oh, nothing like doing math on the fly.
Well, I
in
figured you got
public,
the
right?
spreadsheet
So we
up.
got, if we're saying that the total town is at 42.
Yeah.
Previous is 40, 48, 47, right? So take the previous year's number of 40,847,801 and multiply it by 1.03. You get to 42,073 plus 42,073,000. So you plus minus that, and you take a look at what they're currently projecting of 42,710, 573. We're looking for them to cut 637,337, as well as the 130,000 that we are currently in the hole. 130,758. So we're looking for $768,000 in reduction for next year.
And the other part of my question is I mentioned this at our last meeting, the concept of trying to get the real impact of vacancy into their numbers. So I mentioned delaying the new hires by 6 months. And so that there's 7 people roughly, assuming that they're, making the salary assumption, take half of that, and then that could come off of this 768. So let's say that's 200 grand. So we'd be looking, if they did that, which wouldn't be any change to their current plans, other than just identifying the fact it takes time to hire people and building in vacancy into their numbers. I feel like they should be able to find 500,000 somewhere, right?
I guarantee you they're going to say it's a hard slog.
It seems like that's not like a big number to get to.
Roland?
So I agree with Alex, we recommend 3%. We've had it in our point of view that we were early this year comparatively to other years, right? And I think we made that loud and clear. And so as we said last year, we can't keep spending, or we're going to end up like we did last year and going for another budgetary override. And there's no appetite for that, as we found out. It was close enough last year. So we have to live within our means. That's what it really boils down to. It really boils down to, we can't be doing more than 3%. It's just not going to happen. I mean, I don't see any more insulates moving into town and paying big fees to get into the town, right? So I'm in the 3% camp.
3% and a minimum of 3% for the free cash.
Christie?
Could you please go back to the plan page? I'm going to be unpopular here and say that I am okay with, okay-ish, with the town. They have taken some cuts recently. For me, the 3% is overall. Minuteman has taken the cut out. That said, I 100% think the town needs to make up the difference. The deficit there has to be borne entirely by the town. The school cannot be asked, from what they're going through, to find that other $131,000. But again, somewhat with the nursing service, there are services that we provide to the seniors that kind of fall on the wayside when we put so much of our budget, and it's not just seniors, it's people who don't just have kids in the school. And I think that given that this keeps the overall change in spending within the 3%, that it is reasonable for the town to go above that.
Okay. Corinne, then Alex. So, I'm sorry, Corinne, then Gang, then Alex.
I would like to see the town be closer to 3%. They went up 4% this year compared to the previous year, and that was in a year when they got an override, an operating override. Now they're going up even more without an override. And I'm also looking at the out years. Like both the school and the towns are both pushing close to 4% annual increases for 27, 28, 29. Like it's completely unsustainable. So I think they need to rein it in, and same concern with the reserves. And like I said, they need to start spending within their means, within our means.
About the rainy day fund, the free cash, I think the credit rating agencies look at the position of those rainy day funds. Given the borrowing that this town is doing or is about to do, I think you need to keep a healthy percentage in the free cash, the rainy day fund. Secondly, the rainy day funds are supposed to be spent during rainy days, and I don't think this is a year that can be qualified as a rainy day. So I suppose you should keep a healthy percentage on the rainy day fund. About the increase, as Corinne suggests, if you look back years ago, 2 years ago, it was 3.28%. Last year was 4.12%. That was a year with the override. And this year is 4.9%. It's higher than the year we had the override. And this is the year that we have the cost-saving initiatives to try to cut the town's budget. This budget doesn't reflect that cost-cutting incentives or the cost-cutting will. So I think going back to 3% makes sense. And I also share the similar concerns with the out year. The out year, there is a constantly 3 to 4% increase. So that means because that's the 2.5 proposition, that 3 to 4% means that they will need override, operating or otherwise. So this is not sustainable.
Gang, what is your, what do you feel is a good baseline percentage for reserves, based upon the comment that you just made?
Generally, it's been 3 to 5% in most communities.
Okay?
So, so there's a lot of studies on this,
Yeah.
and usually people say 5%.
Right.
But depending on the size of the town, this percentage varies.
Sure.
If this is the town that usually keeps to 3-5%, it's preferable to keep a similar size unless this is a special year, during COVID or some other emergencies or natural disasters. Then it makes sense to spend down the percentage with the plan of building that up in the near future.
Yeah.
But if there's no reason and just spend down for operating purposes, then that is a concern.
I will say that was a bit of a leading question, I'm sorry. Back in the day, it was equipment finance, we had a reserve of 5% of our warehouse lines. So Scott mentioned earlier about vacancy costs. I wanted to add to that. There is, in some financial modeling that I've done and I've seen in the past, there is a employment churn factor that you can build in when you have a lot of vacancies, when you are hiring a lot of people, the cost of recruiting, getting them onboarded, getting them up to speed, and then they quit after 4 months. And when you have a 30% turnover rate, or whatever the percentage is for some of the areas that I've seen here in the municipality, there's a significant cost to that I would like to see factored into some of these models, if that is something that I can help with or is a possibility, because that hits your bottom line when you're constantly recruiting for people. And when there is a turnover vacancy rate that's high. Thank you.
I had a comment, or maybe two, and maybe a question. I think we've, at some of the previous meetings, the budget meetings that we had here, that we all kind of made some comments and suggestions of possible cuts. When the health insurance rates, they found out they're going to be higher than they expected, town manager had several cuts prepared. It's like, why were they in there in the first place if he was ready to cut them? That was like, maybe they shouldn't have been in there to start with. And I also feel like none of his cuts include some of the things, like, personally, I feel are not core functions of municipal government. And if you have to make cuts, that's where you go. Core functions are public safety and public education. Public education has its own budget. I don't think DEI is a core function. I don't think sustainability is a core function. And childcare subsidies, that came from, started with ARPA money, it sounds like, and that's something that's going to only grow. It's not going to get smaller. And we should pull that out by the roots before it starts to. So I guess those are my comments. I feel like we had those conversations, they did their presentations, we made our comments. The roof, like, what do they need to design roofs for? What's that $50,000 for? Honestly, I don't know. What is that for? Mr., do you know? I don't know what that means. What are they designing roofs for? Our buildings all have roofs, right? Yeah, okay, I don't know. Go ahead.
So I guess they have to do a study to figure out if the structure is still sound enough for a new roof, if there's under the roof was any degradation to the structure.
Okay.
So, and that's one of the questions I asked. It's like, well, we can get funding or something like that. They might qualify for funds.
Okay.
But as I like to say, might ain't is, right? In other words, you may qualify, but there's no guarantee.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the streetlights, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do a study of the streetlights. I can drive around the town and show you where they're out or where they're flickering or whatever.
I wish the one on my
Just
street would go out.
Just replace it, if that's the case. We don't need to have a study to spend a lot of money, because LEDs right now are the most efficient one out there.
Yeah, and then so my
So-
other thing on that was, there's money in there, it's a capital expense, but it's part of the operating budget, and it's to move forward with electrification of this building. And if there's a negative ROI for geothermal and new construction, where almost all of the volume in that building is at a normal temperature, that probably doesn't need to go up or down too much, there's no way there's a positive ROI retrofitting a 160-year-old building. And I feel like we need to see that analysis before they commit money to doing that. And I was like, so those are some things that I think that we could suggest they pull out.
Are you brief?
Am I brief? No.
Can you be?
I will try.
Okay.
I think we are on stronger ground if we tell the select board 3%. We drew that line. It's clear. How they get there, if they want suggestions, boy, do we have them. But for us to step up and say, I want to cut X, and then you got my vote, gets us into an interesting zone I'm not comfortable going. But now, when it comes to core services, once upon a time, what we are providing the seniors was not considered a core service. This town wants it, this town provides it. Damn it, I'm going to fight for it. I think it's a core service. Maybe that's because I'm over 65. But at the end of the day, we are on stronger ground, saying 3%, figure it out, then pick this, pick that, pick this other thing.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not saying that, like, I won't vote, doesn't matter, like I said, we don't get to tell them what to do. I'm not suggesting that we give ultimatums like that, but I also feel like I don't want to be told that there's no possible way they can cut anything.
So in the interest of making sure that Scott and I know the voice of the committee, would I be being overly optimistic by saying that if they came back to us tomorrow with $768,000 in savings, they got to 3%, and they're going to ask us for a wait and see, let's see what our turnbacks is to keep the reserves at 3%. If they came back with that, huge F, would we, as a committee, be at consensus? If they came back and said, we're just going to pick up the $130,000 that's the current overrun, we'll find $131,000 in our budget, but we expect you, Finance Committee, to be good with 4.9% on the municipal side. Are we at consensus at that time? I got one person saying yes. I got a no. You got a question? Go ahead.
Do you have any other ALG models? Any of the, because this only goes back, just when people are thinking about their 3%, Minuteman skyrocketed. The town took that hit. And that's part of why I think it's reasonable to let them have above 3%. They swallowed that, and Minuteman is finally leveling out to a reasonable number. So I have much less of a hard time, because the bottom line number is below 3%.
Well, part of the reason the bottom line number is below 3%, let's be very clear, it's the fall off of major debt cycles. So,
Do we, okay.
yes, we've got,
Do we know that number for,
so it's,
I mean, we're operating within the levy limit.
we are operating within the levy limit,
In
yes.
fact, we're increasing untaxed levy capacity.
So the junior high school debt, 1.43 million, has fallen off.
Yeah.
If that 1.43 million had not fallen off, the tax impact would be well above 3%. So
How can that be if we're living within our levy limit and adding to untaxed levy capacity? We're not using any untaxed levy capacity.
we are not using the untaxed levy capacity. The Minuteman came through lower. The operating debt came through lower. So the overall tax impact is only 2%. But we are using a significant portion of the 3% that we're allowed under Prop 2.5.
But we're not going above that.
We are not, but we're close to it.
Yes.
And so we're saying, do we want to take advantage of the fact that this is a fortuitous year where we don't have where we don't have a capital expense? It hides the fact that that we're still having a greater than 3% operating increase.
I don't understand how we're doing that if we are increasing untaxed levy capacity, unless growth was greater than 3%. I mean, Prop 2.5 plus growth, because we can't.
Minus Minuteman, right? Minuteman goes to the straight to the line,
Yep.
so we're good. New growth, we're actually saying is going to be slightly less, but last year's was 1.06, so that goes to the top line. So it's tight. The operating limit is tight with these two numbers. But I heard you say you're okay with the municipal side being a little higher this year.
Yeah,
I
especially-
heard Greg say that he would sign off at 131,000. Is anyone else okay with signing off at 131,000? Because I'm not. Greg, what I asked is if they came back and said they want to keep the model exactly as it is right now, with the exception of the municipal side, will assume a way of solving this 131,000, would we be at consensus? And you said yes.
Oh, no, I think I was raising my hand to say.
Microphone.
I think I was raising my hand to say I want to speak, but no, I'm not happy with that.
Okay, so you're not a consensus, okay. We said we'd be a consensus if they cut 768?
Yes.
We're not a consensus if they merely cut 131.
Right.
Do we want to try and horse trade this today, or knowing that we're going to have multiple ALG sessions because we're not in consensus overall, do we want to just go with that as our upper bound, lower bound? Do you need more guidance than that, Mr. Sullivan? Or does anyone else care to weigh in at this topic?
Just have that spreadsheet, are the formulas in the spreadsheet everywhere?
Yeah.
Could you just take out the 784 of the, in the operating budget to see what the impact is on the upcoming years? Just want to see what happens, like if you go up to where the 4.9% growth is and just reduce the number coming down to that. It doesn't matter which number you grab, just, yeah, do the 4485, reduce that by, just call it 770. And then I just want to see what happens to the outgoing percentages. Didn't seem like it, did you undo that? Didn't look like it changed at all.
Those are set.
The growth percentages in future years are hard-wired numbers. The 3.78, is that what you're looking for?
I was wondering.
Those are just written in.
They're just typed
They're
in.
predictions.
They're at the end of a formula.
Yeah, that,
Line 36? I need to put an equal sign there. Give me a second. Yeah, there you go. Still 3.78.
all right, so I guess, I don't think the math is working.
That's
The math should change.
yes. Go ahead.
Those are set, so those are not calculated, that's input into the form. ALG decided that the out years would increase by 3.75%. For many years, I've been advocating that we set that to 3. No one agrees with me when I was on ALG. And so
Can you
we
just copy
said,
the formula that has the calculation across over the numbers that are there? You know, actually do the math as opposed to having the number in there.
Tell me what you want me to do.
Just calculate the change year over year instead of using their formula.
So, okay, so just do 3%? Here, just put in 3%?
I guess so, yeah. It doesn't do anything. All right. I was just trying to see what the impact of the change in the current year on the outgoing years. It doesn't seem like we can get the numbers to work, so.
Okay, so in the interest of time, do you have any other guidance for Scott and myself going into tomorrow's ALG meeting? Other than we absolutely think that the current shortfall needs to come out of the municipal side, and the closer they get to a $768,000 change on the municipal side, the closer we are to getting to consensus.
The only thing I would add, I've alluded to this a few times, if they can identify additional sources of revenue, that would be another way that they could tackle it. I don't know how easy it is to do that, but I think it's something we all do. If we want to spend more money than we have, you look for additional sources of income.
Eventually sell Granny Silver. Gang,
Just the number, so Scott, if you just take 760,000 from the operating budget, the percent change operating budget goes down from 4.9% to 2.91%.
Right, but then
right.
the impact of the following years.
We'll have to do some
Yeah.
playing with it. Go ahead, Christie, sorry.
The challenge to finding additional revenue sources is they need to be ongoing, or we don't want to count them as part of the operating budget.
I'll mention that in the liaison reports.
Okay, at this point, I think we are good with the second item. And any other last comments on the operating budget with regards to ALG for tomorrow morning? Go ahead.
Just with regards to ALG guidance, I would like to commend the schools for opening a real discussion of structural changes.
Thank you very much.
Second.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing now. Oh, I shouldn't have stopped sharing. I was a little too short. Meeting minutes of January 14th, I believe is the next item on our agenda. Yes, it is. I did get from Roland that he wanted the correction to replace the LED streetlights that are not working, as opposed to what? Streetlights, why design just replace the LEDs? Roland would like that to be just replace the LED streetlights that are not working. Are there any other comments on the meeting minutes? Looking for a motion, January 14th,
Motion to approve the minutes of January 14th, 2025.
as
As
amended.
amended.
Second.
We are all in person, we can do this by voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That's done. Okay. Moving on, liaison reports. Mr. Jarbo, I believe you wish to go first.
Yeah, there are a couple things. First of all, I went to the Library Board of Trustees meeting last week and presented their kudos for KPI's award. They received them ecstatically. And suddenly, we have friends with books. I don't know what that'll do for you, but it was nice to be welcomed as a member of the Finance Committee to a meeting like that.
Do you have a picture of this award that we presented?
I do. And the award was suitably cheap, because that was the instructions of this committee. And the picture is going to go out with the library newsletter. So they were that honored. Second, there is a meeting tomorrow at noon via Zoom of the Economic Development Committee. They did their first preliminary hearing of their strategic development plan. One of the more interesting ideas that is hidden in it is for a cultural district in either South Acton or West Acton, which would make, hopefully, development of some new businesses in those locations more intriguing, and hopefully also attract state cultural development funds. A final version of that proposal will be presented later this month, and you are going to probably want to go see that because they've got some really phenomenal numbers on where our future job growth is likely to come from. And so if we want to talk about where is the development going to come from, the economic development that will reduce the taxpayer burden because there's more of a commercial, it's centered around where the jobs of the future are going to come from. Where are the business opportunities? including what are the business opportunities for existing businesses to expand. So it's a fascinating report, and I urge you to pay attention. Last but not least, I'm going to this DPW building meeting tomorrow. I think I have a sense of this board. I will try to communicate that clearly. Recognize, I think I may be the only lone voice singing that song. So if anyone wants to come to the audience, it'll be nice to have a two-part harmony.
Any other liaison reports? Gang? No. Alex, our lonely eyes turn to you.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? We are adjourned.